the biggest key to being able to succeed through and with other people is the ability to connect with them.
Welcome to the Disruptance Podcast. Here are your hosts, Eric Forney and Michael Bounds.
Every week on the show, we aim to disrupt the way real estate agents and entrepreneurs think about their business and about life in order to make them more profitable and productive. And this week, Mike, what I want to disrupt is the way you feel about people. Hey, I want to disrupt the way that our listeners feel about people by diving into the difference between the unsexy yet incredibly critical topic of empathy and sympathy. Tyler, so that we can all get on a level playing field, can you pull out your Webster's dictionary there and get us a baseline of what is sympathy and then what is empathy?
According to grammar.yourdictionary.com, sympathy is a feeling you share with another person. Empathy is the ability to understand the emotions of another person. So let me give you an example of a sentence for each. I was saddened to hear of the passing. I've never said something like that. I was saddened to hear of his passing and gave his family my deepest sympathy. That's like a sentence I want to say. Let's find a sentence I might. We didn't expect a sympathy vote in the election, but happily the underdog won. Let's do one more to make it an even 3. We didn't expect I just read that one. Mm-hmm. We felt such sympathy for our neighbors who lost everything in the wildfires, but we donated what we could. Let's go to empathy. Empathy, here's an example of that. Surprisingly, her parents showed empathy and calmly listened to her side of the story. The killer could not offer any empathy for his victims or their families. As I had lost my job last year, I had empathy for my friend when she was fired. Since becoming a mother, I have developed a great deal of empathy for those who have lost children. So, and my takeaway is, if you've experienced what they are dealing with, and I was telling you guys about this before we started rolling, I experience empathy when I see a real estate agent get interrupted with something they're doing, and then they have to take that phone call because you got to answer it. Right. You got to deal with the inspection, or you got to prospect. And you might be in the middle of watching a movie with your family or out to eat, but you got to take that call. I feel for that. I feel for agents that when they have to do that. Sometimes agents don't care. Yeah. I cared so much when I hated that feeling of going to my phone when I was in real estate and just dreading the missed calls if I were gone from my phone for 30 minutes. And I was like, there's so much that I'm going to have to deal with when I look at this phone. And I record podcasts talking about real estate. So here we are.
So what was an example of, did you have an example of sympathy? Right, because you said you're empathetic if an agent goes to their phone because you can recognize that emotion because it attaches to something you've previously felt. What was the sympathy emotion you gave? For example,
I don't think I gave one, but
you said you couldn't recognize you've never lost a parent. A parent, right?
Yes, you're right. Yeah, I haven't lost a parent, so I'd feel sympathetic to somebody that had lost a parent. On a lighter note, I feel sympathetic that Eric's furniture is delayed. So I feel for him because we're being able to try out different spots within his house.
That's right.
As his furniture rolls in from 6 months ago. Yep.
Yeah. I have little to no empathy for the supply chain either. So I'm with you, bro.
So I love this. Last week when we were, because this is something that we kind of get together and we want to talk through. After last week's show, the empathy came up. And so I've kind of felt a tug, I wanted to kind of get clarity around that. So a lot of the issue is there's empathy and then there's displaying empathy. And see, there's a subtle difference there. And so I know we talked about in the podcast, we talked about exhibiting empathy
Yeah.
versus actually having empathy are two things. So I think as a society, like what kind of prompted this? We were talking about. Well, so you want to talk about what prompted?
Yeah. So a couple things that came up in conversation when I was teaching. One, of course, being in a relationship, you encounter all kinds of situations in life when sympathy and empathy show up. My belief is that empathy is the most powerful or empowering emotion or display for someone to feel, and so it's a conversation we have at home oftentimes, which is, do you want empathy or do you want a solution? So it comes up at home in conversation. And then, I think that empathy becomes the most effective way oftentimes of, this is going to sound as a negative, but I truly mean this as a positive, is empathy is the most effective way of accomplishing forward progress towards, and oftentimes in sales, that means persuasion. Right. And so in order to persuade, oftentimes we need empathy.
What's the ultimate way to connect? Like when I'm connecting on that level with someone, like it's like you're moving in partnership.
Correct.
And so like, I'm sorry, I cut you off, but what were you saying?
No, I love that example because you're right. I like the mental image when you paraphrase it that way to me is almost like this tethering, right? It's like this link between two people on a similar plane or similar wavelength where they're feeling, understanding, and alignment of goals oftentimes are unified. And so you would imagine that persuasion happens much more effectively because there's finally alignment. That we're no longer seeing resistance; we're seeing alignment.
We're one. You're actually empathy binds us together. So like last week we were talking about like the show, and when you empathize with people, you will move for them. But if you don't have empathy for them, you don't move the same way. Does that, if it's us or them?
I love that, the idea of thinking about it as in order for it not to be us versus them, there has to be empathy, right? So I'm going to make one quick statement. The third thing that it came up in conversation last week, we'll put a pin in, then we'll come back to, which was there was a clip from the show 2 weeks ago when we were talking about racial inequality in housing, where I said that one of the very first things that has to happen is there has to be leadership, and then we have to exhibit empathy, and so I love this because we have two different perspectives on the idea of whether empathy is like a show of emotions or whether it has to exclusively be like something that you like feel and are compelled to. So we'll come back to that.
I love that you went there because that's what I want to talk about. I think that's a huge difference. But go ahead.
So let's first get a baseline like level of ensuring that everyone understands like what empathy is, and then we'll unpack that idea of whether empathy is a showing or is an action.
That's the gap. Oh, that's the gap.
Okay, so empathy like Tyler mentioned from a definition standpoint, is empathy is one's ability to put themselves into someone else's perspective. And oftentimes we think about it as putting ourselves in the perspective of someone who's experiencing an act or the infliction of pain. Okay. And so there's a ton of data and research and MRI activity that indicates that we have the ability to understand empathy as infants. Right, is that as children, another child can watch a child being harmed or hurt or experiencing some mechanism of pain and feel that same pain. There's brain activity in the child who's watching the pain or watching the other person experience pain that activates the mirror neurons or the ability to also feel or light up when they watch someone else experiencing pain.
Okay.
And so we know that that happens to children. There's research even showing that mice and many other animals experience the brain activity of empathy when watching other mice or geese experience pain. So we know that we have to understand that empathy is a physiological response.
Okay.
Right? If that's the case, there is an action in the brain that occurs when we see someone else going through an item of pain. And so the difference between whether we display sympathy or empathy is, in my opinion, whether or not we take that person's perspective. That becomes the gap.
Okay.
Right? Is the difference between sympathy, which in my opinion is a disempowering or a diminishing display of emotion, compared to empathy, which is an empowering and aligning emotion, is whether or not we first take that person's perspective.
I agree. I totally agree. It's almost, sympathy can be patronizing.
Absolutely, it is.
You know what I'm saying?
We were saying off air before we went on is I hate sympathy. Like, absolutely hate it.
It's awkward for me. It's awkward for you to give it to me. Like,
it is so emasculating to me. Like, it is like, hey, I'm sorry, you're a little bitch. Like, that's how it makes me feel. Like, is you're just I understand that when someone is giving me sympathy, that's not their intent. That's just how I receive it.
Yeah. It could be. I mean, I am okay getting it and giving it. It's just kind of like an awkward thing, and when you're going through something, so it's uncomfortable more so for me. But I think that we need to get clear, like what you hit on, the thumbtack is, I think, is where our gap is, and so we're really good at displaying empathy. We're really good. We have systems in place to allow us to give back to the United Way. We go and donate to Gleaners, and we do those things. But the difference between sympathy and empathy is, to me, is this. So when you've had, like, say, a thunder, like a snowstorm, okay, and you've lost your power, and it's cold in your house, and you don't know when your power is going out, okay, or when your power is going to come back in. Then think, next time you're at, in the hood, you think, this is happening every day here. So then when you are able to flip that switch and realize, okay, that is happening there, that is me. Like, that's how did I feel when I didn't have power, like, for a day? I was scared. I was upset, and being able to, like, put yourself in that other person's perspective versus having, I'm sorry that happened to you. I'm really sorry that happened to you. So if you take it from the approach, like, that could be me, you do something about it. You make a change. And that's what empathy is. When you say, oh man, I'm sorry about that, you keep it pushing. Yeah. So you see what I'm saying? That's the biggest difference between the two. Yeah.
When you say, I'm sorry that happened, what you really have done is you've not let that emotion of the other person's perspective inside of you, right? No. You've not been willing to feel what it would feel like. Now, understand too, from this is challenging, because as I listened to you, one of the things in that example you gave was, is I was like, okay, maybe in that moment wouldn't feel empathetic. And I say that in one of the things I want to make a point of is that empathy is taxing.
It is.
And it takes time. And so the challenge in today's society is that there are so many causes and so many ways in which we should be empathetic towards humanity and towards each other. And yet it takes a lot of time, and it exerts a heavy tax on your neurosystem.
So guess we shut it down.
So that's right. That's right.
We shut it down and we systematize it, and we go to Gleaners and that's what's going on here, is we've made it efficient.
Yeah.
Versus exhibited instead of actually having empathy, we're really good at exhibiting.
Yeah. So I want to think about this from the person who's listening as an entrepreneur or as a real estate agent and go, okay, well, why the hell does any of this matter?
Okay.
Right? Like, okay, that's cute, right? There's a difference between empathy and sympathy, but so what? Well, the so what, if we apply it to a business standpoint or to a sales standpoint or to a leadership standpoint is that understand that when you run a business or when you exist in this world, that where you succeed with other people and through other people, that the single key, the biggest key to being able to succeed through and with other people is the ability to connect with them. Right. And so the most effective way to connect is to be empathetic. And that means perspective taking of the other person that you're in communication with, which means then as a leader, you have to slow down in order to connect with someone that you work with, or in order to connect with someone that you need to achieve results through. Otherwise, what you encounter is a lot of resistance and a lot of unwillingness to be effective.
Yeah, and another thing is it could be a business model. It could be your big why. So it could end up actually fueling your business if you're into like whatever you're passionate around. You can set goals around that, and you can infuse that within the DNA of your organization. So that's good for the community, and it also can be good from a morale perspective. I have a friend of mine that he's written books on it. He's Tim Moorman, Moorhead. Sorry, I'm mixing people up. He's over at TCC, the Cellular Connection, and they have it rooted within their business giving back initiatives. And so it's a huge thing that can fuel your business. Yeah.
So we have to take the perspective of other people in business in order to achieve results, especially from a leadership standpoint. And then we have to understand that we have to be able to differentiate our emotions from someone else's emotion in that particular instance. And oftentimes the effective way to get alignment and to move forward or to gain progress is to label that emotion as well.
Yeah.
Right? Because labeling it then helps to make the connection that there's alignment between two people, that there is a shared understanding of the experience, the pain, or the feeling.
Yeah, you have clarity, you're lockstep. To be honest with you, that's another form of like intimacy when you're building a team and you guys are working and you're firing on all 8 cylinders. You've got to be able to put yourself in from their perspective when you're making decisions.
So then it also is an effective way to negotiate.
Okay.
Because again, empathy can be an effective way to change the dynamic, the energy, the resistance of a particular situation where you're at an impasse. And so when I think about, in our particular industry, like let's say it's real estate, and in this market, there's not nearly as much negotiation as there have been in years past, because now it's taking, it's not negotiation in the traditional sense, in that you're not negotiating necessarily for like the lowest like money off on right. each particular house. Right. Oftentimes what you're doing is negotiating for the best terms, the best price, the best potential outcome. And that is obviously worth something. But what I have to do then is I have to, in order to exhibit empathy in a negotiation, the most effective thing I can do is first go in taking the perspective of the person that I'm negotiating with. Right. Okay, so if I'm negotiating with a listing agent, then I'm going to audit myself as a listing agent, put myself in the perspective of, if I'm the listing agent, what would I want? Right. What would I be thinking? What would I be feeling? What would I be wanting to hear? And when I put myself into that position, now I can change the dynamic of the conversation. I'm shifting to us, instead of being adversarial, we're side by side in this negotiation. That's right, we're aligned. And so I'm going to tactically then use empathy to negotiate for the client, or to negotiate for whatever my agenda or cause is, let's say. And so by perspective taking and then by emotional understanding and emotional labeling, I'm going to be able to strengthen my client's position and increase the likelihood of getting a desirable outcome.
It's fuel. So I have a client. I met with a client. we have this fallacy that people are moving to something. They're moving from something.
Yeah.
And by understanding what they're moving from, you are demonstrating empathy, because now I need to understand, okay, like for example, I've told this story before on the podcast. I had a client that I wanted to understand why she was moving from her place. She mentioned these little neighbor boys kept smoking weed by her in her apartment, and she got tired of it. And one time somebody was trying to climb in her window. And so when I met with her later on to have this conversation, I wanted to get her why. Why is it? Well, you know what? I know in this new place you won't have the issues that you've been having at your last place. I was able to put myself in her shoes and say, look, this is the reason why you're doing this. And so I was able to, it fueled me throughout the process, because guess what? As an agent, I want to fix that problem.
That's right.
Right?
That's right. Yeah.
So I had empathy because I wanted to fix her problem. It gave me the fuel that I needed, and it gave her the fuel that she needed to take action, because we were clear on what that was.
And you wouldn't have wanted to fix that problem if you were just sympathetic towards her.
Right. I'm like, oh man, I'm sorry.
I'm so sorry you're dealing with that.
Right. I'm sorry. But being empathetic, I understood. She was really upset, and I was like, you know what? I'm going to fix that.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting because it's oftentimes I think that one of the keys to empathy can be is just giving a damn.
That's it.
Now, is actually giving a damn about someone else in that particular moment, being willing to stop, detach from the mind, the stories that are going on in your head, everything that you're doing in the moment, and then just giving a damn in that particular instance about what someone else is thinking, feeling, and experiencing, because it actually ends up being the most effective and the fastest way to get to a desirable outcome anyway.
That's what's so exhausting about it, is there's so many things to give a damn about.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
So it's really exhausting. So I think we just kind of get into this atrophy where we just don't give a damn about anything.
That's right. We do. In fact, Mike, what we know is that some of the research shows us that while we develop the physiological brain imaging response as infants to be triggered or to have that mirror neuron effect when someone else is experiencing pain, we do start to like blunt it or diminish it and desensitize from it. Oftentimes as we grow up, depending on culture especially. But one of the challenges that we know is that it's oftentimes much harder to be empathetic towards strangers. It's harder to be empathetic towards members of another race or another outgroup, and it's more challenging to be empathetic towards individuals marked by social stigma.
Right.
And so we know that desensitizing towards that physiological response is something that goes on every single day, which is why I think then where we get at the portion that we put a pin to earlier, which is empathy a display of emotions, or is it a feeling of emotion, or is it we're actually just conflating and blending the two, saying the same thing? Because what I think first is that empathy becomes a skill that has to be practiced after we first exert the willingness to want to be empathetic. Empathy starts with a desire to be willing to be empathetic. And then it becomes a skill set that we have to build over time through practice, because for some reason we've become desensitized to it, right? Through life.
It's a mindset, bro.
Absolutely.
I really do. I just think it's like, where's that gap? Is it, okay, am I empathetic at displaying empathy, or am I empathetic and actually feeling empathy? You see what I'm saying?
I do.
I think there's a conflation there. Yeah. And I think as a society, we're really good at displaying empathy and not actually having it. So
here's what's fascinating. So is because it's easy for me to take my own perspective, because especially from a clip in which it's easy to pick on that one, right where I said exhibit empathy, and it makes for a good topic of conversation as well, is that if for me to be empathetic, I then have to say, okay, I understand, I feel, I see how one would hear me say exhibit empathy, and receive that as something that is either disingenuous or not not also corresponding to the feeling?
No, what I think is this. Close your eyes and think of a time that you were scared.
Okay.
And think of a time that you were something. And then when somebody else is going through that, think that's the reason why, like, I understand why they're, and like a lot of the issues that we're having, everything boils down to anxiety, y'all. So like anxiety on top of each other, it's like the systematic bills. Like every time I okay, you're driving down the street, you hit a pothole. Have you been on 38th Street? Like, if you know what I'm saying? Like that's every day. So like you approach it differently if you're like, okay, this is me, this is happening to me, than if this is happening to them. So like last week you did a description and it was beautiful. It was flowery. You're talking about Abraham Lincoln, and you were talking about how he had to immerse himself and like study him. The thing with empathy, to me that's acting. Acting is different than empathy. So do you see what I'm saying? So like when I'm acting, I'm still someone else. But when I have empathy, it's me. That's the gap.
I think the challenge becomes the challenge of communication becomes the confusion of words, right? Because what the concept of mirror neurons would tell us would be that, like, when an infant sees another infant, when a child sees another child experience this, it lights up a similar pain receptor, right? And so that is mirroring the same feeling or the same response. Where we get really stuck is the words then of how each other would describe it. But they have to exhibit. Empathy becomes effective when it's shown, when it's exhibited, right? It is when we exhibit the feeling that someone knows.
When we signal it. That's not necessarily. We talked about we can be we can be like totally lack of empathy, right? And still go donate. We can still go and do things. Yeah. So that's the exhibit, right? But that's not necessarily having it.
Correct. Those two things don't have to be synonymous, but I guess you're a sociopath if they're not. And so, so here's the interesting thing though, is that most of the time I believe we can tell the difference between genuine empathy and sociopathic displays of hollowed empathy, or the attempt to be empathy. I think that's where the sympathy part comes in, is that, like, if we know someone is disingenuous in their empathy, oftentimes we feel it, we experience it. We don't have that same connection, right? Like we go, okay, I especially think about this in arguments, in disagreements in relationships, because, we work on this a lot at home. And I've spent a ton of time in therapy working on it, right? We've talked about, I can remember I think I went to therapy first in 2012, 13, something in that range. And being asked the question of, when was the last time you were sad? And with a badge of pride, I said, I don't know, maybe like 7, 8, 9. I don't know. Yeah. And I thought that was a positive thing, right? I thought that was a really good thing that I couldn't tell you if and when I was last sad. And it took practicing to actually feel emotions, to have the idea of actually feeling emotions. It wasn't until I practiced feeling emotions and like building that like resensitizing, resensitizing that I then started to be able to be more tolerant, I think, and start to feel empathy and so on. I think the challenge becomes, though, is that when we don't get when we don't receive genuine empathy, then we don't actually have any real alignment if there's a disagreement, or if there's not a unification of perspective.
And I think that the opposite of, like, you can have too much empathy and be Captain Sable.
Yeah.
So like that's the problem, is like you'll have empathy for everybody.
Yeah.
And then there's some people that you just can't help. So that was my problem. I'm such an empath that I had to deal it back.
Yeah. Tyler, I know that you obviously spent a lot of times working on things like this as well. Anything that you can think of that you would add from your own experience or from a perspective on empathy?
On some small scales, I was just thinking every videographer or photographer is definitely at some point in time of their career, or if you haven't, you will at some point forget an SD card when you show up to the shoot.
Yeah.
And so when I get that text message, they're like Michael, our guy that's here helping film.
Producer.
We got Michael's here.
Producer
now,
Mike and Mike now.
Yeah. But I remember, and I got a text message that he showed up to his shoot and forgot something like vital, like a battery or like a SD card. Was it? It was the battery, and I've been there. I've been there so many times too. When
the pain
when I
is
read
in that
that
response.
So I read that, and I was on a shoot myself, and I was just like, oh, I went to that time. I remember like the house that I was at when I had to do it.
Yep.
Even for this podcast, before I forgot an SD card and had to run to a CVS and go get it. And so it's just like, you just feel it, and that's the best way I could describe empathy.
For me, from my perspective, I had to immediately tell somebody that I knew could empathize with the situation.
Right.
Yeah.
I did that. But sympathy would be like, you know what? I'm sorry you did that.
That's
Take
right.
your ass and go get me a battery.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Right.
But so this is a good point, Mike. Producer Mike, you bring up a good statement, which is that you had to tell someone who could empathize with you, because as social creatures, there is something comforting and empowering about telling someone else who can understand our plight, who can feel the same plight that we're experiencing, where it, for whatever reason, it gives us a sense of comfort and a relief from that pain.
Sense of community.
That's right. It also, I think, is like it's almost giving us permission to work through that pain or that experience, and it's quickly relieving of itself.
Yeah.
Yeah, you get to talk to somebody that's been through the experience, and you can kind of give yourself a little bit of grace, and then you can also just vibe with somebody on something shitty that happened.
And you also give yourself that grace to like forgive yourself, given that it's happened to other people. The challenge that we have in today's society, right, is that you said earlier, the world is experiencing a high degree of stress and anxiety. And what we know, there's a fantastic book by a neuroscientist, Lisa Feldman Barrett, wrote a book called I'm going to screw the title up, but it's something like the 7.5 Brain Lessons. But I want to read a couple of things. And I don't usually like to read things verbatim, but when you're a neuroscientist and what you study is the neuroscience of emotions and empathy, it would be foolish for me to just go and paraphrase them and screw them up. But she talks about a lot about how right now, especially in a world where there's high stress and high anxiety, that being empathetic is highly taxing to our neurosystem, and so we have a hard time when we're stressed of seeing other people's perspective. Okay. And so that could be one of the challenges and she said that a lot of times when people say don't be sad or don't be angry, really what they're saying is, I don't want to deal with you being angry or sad. I don't want to feel that way, so I want you to change or calm down. We're immediately tempted to help try to regulate their emotions, when in fact what people usually want is just empathy. Sometimes they may want a solution. And it's understanding the difference between, does someone want to feel heard and understood, or do they want a solution to their pain or to what pains them?
And we normally jump to whatever we want. Give them a solution, Captain Save them.
Or we give them sympathy because we don't want to feel that, right? We don't want to be sad. We don't want to be angry. We don't want to deal with that. So we go with sympathy, because empathy is the one that is the most taxing.
It's an investment.
It is. That's right. It's an investment. I love that concept. And so, she talks about that our brains are just meaning-making machines. Right? As every day your brain just goes out and makes meaning of life from its own perspective. And understand that you're just always seeing your surroundings subconsciously and determining whether there are threats in the environment or can I eat this? Is this poisonous? Is this food? Are these people safe? Are they not? Am I belonging? Do I not? Right? You're always making meaning of your surroundings, and so it's a useful practice for everyone to see the world through other people's point of view. Taking someone else's perspective is a way to get closer to reality. It dislodges you from the illusion that your way of seeing the world is the only way of seeing the world. And the old philosophy of anger is a form of ignorance is largely true, because maybe the person that cut you off in traffic is rushing to take their child to the hospital. Yet it's difficult to see that person's perspective when we're angry about being cut off in traffic. And so the idea is to build the muscle of empathy and emotional regulation so that you can effortlessly give the grace of empathy and understanding despite the plight of that particular person.
It's just like, to be honest with you, it's just like this is a Christian.
Yeah.
It's just like you're trying to look through. Like I've given this analogy. I'm going down I-69 and I see a really bad accident, and so the Christian, like the flesh in me, is mad because I'm sitting in traffic and it's not moving, and I got an appointment. But then the Christian in me, what it allows me to do is see that and understand that is me. My wife is getting a really bad phone call about me. And so by me being able to put myself in that person's shoes, that takes the sting out of me sitting in that traffic. And the anxiety is that discomfort, like from me being mad because this guy's got the worst day of his life and I'm mad because I'm inconvenienced. So that's how I'm able to like do ninja jujitsu and like I'm not mad. Like that I could be that guy.
Yeah, I love that. It's the idea of the actual root principles and fundamentals of Christianity as a good example of that. It gets oftentimes conflated, right, in the rules and religion of Christianity. Lastly, I want to highlight on the last thing that Lisa Barrett talks about with empathy, and that is our brains continuously trying to guess other people's thoughts and feelings, and we usually forget that we're just guessing what other people are thinking and feeling. And so the best way to prevent this is to ask rather than to make assumptions.
We take shortcuts.
Yeah.
We take shortcuts based on my experience. This is what happens. And so then based on that, this is how I'm going to react. But then is that the cause of the outcome, or is it because of the way we come at it? Is it this chicken or the egg?
That's right.
Talking about that.
Yeah, that's right. And so asking is the best way to prevent making assumptions, right? Is ask powerful questions. And then lastly, she says, appreciate nature daily. Is a great reminder that your problems are small. Learning about nature, learning about the universe, or things that maybe are topics that are so wildly complex and beyond comprehension, oftentimes is a great reminder that our problems are truly small and inconsequential in the great ecosystem of life.